Father Vogel. We continue our series on St. John Baptiste de La Salle's Meditations in Time of Retreat. These meditations that assist teachers and anybody else who is involved in the education of youth into really reflecting upon God's vocation for them in spreading the gospel to the next generations. So we've been going through the life of Father La Salle, and we've gotten to the point where we talked about the schools that he and his brothers formed, the Christian schools. And so we want to look at the transformation that this is going to bring to the system of education. So an entirely new kind of pedagogy, a new way of teaching is going to come into being. Such innovations such as having a fixed start and end of the school day. I know, amazing, isn't it? I wouldn't think that would be something that would have been lacking, but yet that's what it was. Teachers would show up whenever they wanted, and students may or may not come. But now you have a set schedule, a set day. The doors would be locked to incentivize the students to get there in time. The school day would start at 7:30 and it would end at 4:30 in the afternoon. And there would be a fixed schedule of classes, which was also something new, having that kind of set time for subjects. Every day they would teach catechism. These were Catholic schools, so it was really important to learn the faith. Also, there would be daily prayer as part of the schedule as well, and at daily mass as part of it. With the long school day like that, there were also meals that were provided, which included breakfast as well as an afternoon snack. And those two, breakfast and afternoon snack, the students themselves would bring food, usually just bread, to have the meal. And beautifully, this was also part of teaching students who had food to assist those who had less. So they would share their food with one another. Another innovation that came about through the Christian schools was grouping the students by their ability and their achievement. So basically forming grade levels. This hadn't been done before that. And with part of that as well was also the implementation of the simultaneous method. Very new. So this is the method that we're used to, right? Of one teacher being up in front of the classroom. So one brother would be in front of the classroom instructing the whole class on a certain subject. And then for the Christian schools, they had a second brother who would kind of walk around, and he was in charge of discipline. So he'd take care of all the discipline things for it, so the main brother could focus on the actual subject matter that was being taught. So in mentioning discipline, there were some changes in how discipline was done. In fact, Father La Salle wrote another work called the Conduct of Christian Schools. And so that's going to focus on a lot of the practical how does the day look? How do we go about teaching? What subjects are being taught? As well as looking at the discipline aspect. So remember, I talked about the main form of discipline during that time was corporal punishment when children were misbehaving. But now in the Christian schools, de Salle is going to forbid corporal punishment. So that's not allowed to be used anymore in his schools, but instead they kind of developed this system of positive and negative reinforcement. A lot of these things probably sound familiar to what we look at in schools today. Also was a system of grades to help incentivize the learning as well. So this work of the Conduct of Christian Schools, I'll put a link in the video description if you want to check it out. It's kind of gives the more practical things, whereas the meditations we're going to go through gives the spiritual background of teaching. These give kind of the very practical things that those brothers would do if you're interested in that. So what about the subjects that the students would learn? Well, the subjects were the reading, writing, and arithmetic. The ones that we've come to know, as well as spelling and as I mentioned earlier, the catechism, learning about the faith. Now, if you remember, other schools had been teaching reading and writing in Latin, but Father Salle and the brothers recognized that they only had so much time with these children. These poor children would very quickly be drawn into the workforce by their families. And so they didn't really have time to help them master Latin. And it wasn't necessarily going to be all that useful for them in their poor working class. And so they went right to teaching to read and write in the vernacular. For them, it was French. So that way, it can truly, reading and writing, and Father Salle was very convinced that you learn to read and write, that can do wonders to help you in the rest of your life. So these things were, the beginnings were focused on this kind of elementary level education. But Father Salle didn't stop there, because he, in recognizing the need for the instruction of teachers, began to set up schools, kind of colleges, for the instruction of teachers. That really began to up to this point, teachers weren't, and probably some teachers would attest to today, some people may not look at the occupation of teaching as highly as other occupations, and it was worse back then. So this was the first time where it really saw as teaching as this is a really important career to be undertaken. So formulation of colleges for the instruction of teachers, as well as programs of continuing education for the teachers once they are in schools, as well as for parents of students. And so this would be available in evenings to assist parents to be able to work on their education that they probably hadn't really been able to do earlier on. Also, formation of kind of like technical or business type schools for students that would graduate from the primary grades, but yet were still interested in furthering education. And so these would be focused much more on learning how to do certain businesses or practical tasks in the workforce. So that was made available to them as well. So also, as you begin to have this greater system of schools begin to form, they also formulated kind of a means of being consistent across the different schools, of almost like accreditation type process. It was really kind of visitation. So brothers from one school would go to other schools and visit, and so there would be this cross-checking to make sure that the same vision that St. LaSalle was instilling within these schools would be carried out in the wide communities that they were beginning to spread to. So I find it really fascinating that you see so many elements that we find today in education had its origins here in the late 17th century, early 18th century here in France, with St. Jean-Baptiste de La Salle and his brothers in the Christian schools. So one more video that I'm going to do on the life of Saint Jean-Baptiste de La Salle, just to finish up his life and talk a moment about the order today. And then in the video after that, we'll begin to get into the meat of this series, which is the actual meditations themselves. God bless.